Hello, all. Welcome to part one of Unit 7 for APUSH because this unit is a lengthy one. As for this video, we will be covering the build up to World War One itself, and the consequences of World War One. And even before all that, we'll also be covering imperialism. So let's get right into it, just to make sure these parts aren't all half an hour. So let's start with imperialism, America overseas, outside of North America. These are some of the reasons that imperialism occurred. They can all really be divided into these three sections: economics, politics, and military. Let's go left to right. Economics opens new markets and more resources to produce goods. So, like I had said many times before, land brings natural resources. We've seen that with the market revolution and with the industrial revolution. And more land and more civilization brings more domestic markets, more areas to sell your products to. So, generally, just getting more lands and more people is just good for business when you have such a massive output and you're able to export it like that. Dollar diplomacy empowered economic imperialism. Dollar diplomacy was sort of a not necessarily a foreign policy, but it was a policy enforced alongside imperialism, where the two presidents for this policy, William Taft, who came right after Teddy Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson, who came right after Taft, they both used this policy of dollar diplomacy so that they would be able to invest money into these underdeveloped states so that when those states eventually grow, they can have good relationships with the US and they can be good trade partners. So it's pretty much just an investment. It's like very literally an investment into smaller, less developed nations. Moving forward into politics, changes to foreign policy, more territory means more power. So think about most of you either took AP most of you either took AP World or AP Euro. Think about the massive superpowers for those courses respectively. We have many land-based empires. Let me just throw an example. The Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire spans a lot of land. They had a lot of territories that they conquered. And you also have territories like Britain. Britain is actually a great example for this course because the whole reason that Britain was a global superpower in Unit 2 is because it had so many different um territories under its belt. Like the colonies aided in this, like in Britain being a superpower. So yeah, pretty much just the more air like the more areas you control, the more like power you have, the more resources you get, the better off you are economically, the stronger you are as a nation. Efforts towards spreading democracy were also present within imperialism. We'll get to that when we talk about other um, nations and territories gained during certain imperial endeavors, but we can also see something similar with the Haitian Revolution, where not we weren't necessarily imperializing them, but we were in a way protecting democracy through issuing. Do you remember what? The Monroe Doctrine, because the Monroe Doctrine split the world in half between the West and East Hemisphere, and we were protecting democracy through that by cutting off all colonial ties on the eastern side of the world. So yeah, we weren't. That's just to give you an idea of what I mean by saying when I say spreading democracy. For the military, there is really just um one document that really solidifies and encapsulates this whole point, where it's Alfred Thayer Mahan's The Influence of Sea Power in History, that piece of literature. What it does is that it pretty much just says that if you have enough strong dispersed points across the world, like you have pretty much a lot of military power. Take like here with in this unit in this video, we're gonna talk about, spoiler alert, we're gonna talk about Hawaii and Pearl Harbor. The whole reason we went to Hawaii is so that we can have, well, part of the reason we went to Hawaii is so that we can have Pearl Harbor, because by the time World War II comes, the invasion of Pearl Harbor happens, and that's our buffer between the east and west hemisphere of the world. And yeah, just The more sea power you have, the more you control the sea, the more power you have. So that was another incentive for imperialism. And now I want to bring you guys full circle. First, we started with the city on a hill idea, where we wanted America to be a city on a hill. We wanted to be above the rest. We wanted to be something exceptional. Then we move on. Time of Thomas Jefferson. He goes ahead with the Louisiana Purchase in hopes of creating an empire of liberty so that America can prosper and become a true superpower. Next, we have Manifest Destiny, less akin to the previous two, but still akin in the fact that it's promoting the power and spread of America and American culture. Except rather than, well, again, just like the previous two, it was about spreading it on a more continental scale. But finally, we reach a world scale, a global scale, with this idea of American exceptionalism, which also can be paired with social Darwinism. But American exceptionalism itself is this idea that imperialism in spreading our American culture is beneficial for those territories that we're taking over. So take Hawaii. Like we're gonna get in more in depth with that, but it was seen that our takeover of Hawaii was not only beneficial for us, but beneficial for them because we were spreading our astoundingly great American culture to this this like civilization that didn't have that quote unquote gift of American culture. So that's American exceptionalism. It was sort of a idealistic justification behind imperialism. And also, just to add on to what I said earlier, social Darwinism can also be thought of as like another justification for imperialism because survival of the fittest. America is the fittest in the Western Hemisphere compared to most nations, and even on some nations near the more eastern side of the world, we're still the fittest. Take, spoiler alert, the Philippines. We were thought to be more fit than the Philippines, so we took them over and we adopted them, pretty much, quote unquote adopted. But you get the point. Moving forward, Ah, the Monroe Doctrine, like I had just discussed, split the world in two in hopes of isolating the Western Hemisphere from all the raunchiness of the Eastern Hemisphere at the time, and it was a effort to protect democracy. Then, now we add on the Roosevelt Corollary, which was an extension of the Monroe Doctrine. The Roosevelt Corollary enforced this idea of big stick diplomacy, where you have to speak softly, but you carry a big stick. Excuse me. But pretty much just in simple terms, just don't make these you don't make these loud verbose threats. You don't make these demands and commands, but you show off your power when it's needed. And just like with the rest of imperialism, we're going to see it in a certain war coming up soon. But Teddy Roosevelt himself, he wanted America to be the quote unquote policeman of the world. He wanted to be a monitor, a regulator in a way. And he was using not only his power as president to push that agenda, but the power of America to push that agenda through imperialism to be able to monitor the world in a way. And this is like these strides towards putting America on a global scale beyond just having our own internal wars with the Civil War, but beyond just having our own land expansion within our own continent. We are exploring the world, like just like how Britain did. Just like how Britain did. Remember that for later. Moving forward. Here are just some of our imperial adventures. The first of which that I want to start off is Alaska in 1867. Again, if you had O'Brien, you'll remember this as Seward's Folly. Seward purchases purchases Alaska for a large sum of money, and this was seen as something stupid because in to many of the minds of wow, in many of the minds of Americans, Alaska was just seen as a quote unquote icebox. Like, look in this cartoon, it literally looks like Antarctica with a bunch of snow bears. I mean, polar bears. And although yes, that is what it seemed like on the surface, Seward still went ahead with the purchase, and it kind of did pay off because there was abundant natural resources, and it did put America closer to that western side of the world. I mean, eastern side of the world. Excuse me. But yeah, that's Seward's Folly. Moving forward, Hawaii 1898. Like I had just said, Hawaii, our focus was to gain a military buffer in the ocean to follow up on that military incentive to imperialize, and it was also to set up new markets. And the justification for going to Hawaii and taking it over is that we're helping an uncivilized people. And I have this image here because this is the Queen of Hawaii, Queen Lilokulani. And does she seem that uncivilized? No, she doesn't seem that uncivilized. It's as she like many of the depictions of these people were borderline tribal, and that's kind of where some of the evils of imperialism show, where we have this justification like, oh, we're helping these tribal people, these uncivilized people. Meanwhile, a lot of them really weren't as uncivilized as they were portrayed to be. So that raises some suspicions about the the justifications behind imperialism. But yeah, that's why we take it over successfully, and it's officially annexed into the United States of America after a certain war that we will get to. Finally, well, before we move on to the war, finally we have China, which we go to in 1899, and we try and enact an open door policy with China, where we have completely open trade with them, because China and that section geographically has been very reclusive, very isolationist in a in a way. Well, not in a way, they are isolationist, but yeah, they are very hesitant to open up their doors. And Uncle Sam here, Uncle Sam, representation for America, he wants to enact. He wants to have an open door with China so that they can have like accessible, easy, convenient, like good trade. They want to have good trade relationships with them, and it is enacted. But American missionaries eventually go into China and try and convert some of the Chinese citizens into Christians. And remember, China, the Chinese civilization, they've been isolated. They aren't really used to that kind of change, and so that kind of influence being put onto them pressured them, and it was offensive. And that kind of is what the Boxer Rebellion is about. It was a battle between the Chinese civilians and the American missionaries. Very minor in the grand scheme of things. Moving forward, we have the Spanish American War of 1898, the big thing that I've been talking about. This was a very big war, primarily because of the consequences, which we'll get to. But the cause for it is that there was a revolution in Cuba. Cuba, which was currently owned by Spain, was launching a revolution against them and against the dictatorship of Spain. And America, wanting to promote and protect democracy, decides to help the Cuban revolutionaries and help them when they call for aid. So the conflict occurs and America mobilizes. Theodore Roosevelt goes in, he's not yet president. So this again continues the trend of American presidents being past war heroes. So Theodore Roosevelt goes into the Philippines with his Rough Riders and he invades the Philippines and he launches a complete takeover of the Philippines, knocking out all the Spanish forces on like day zero of the war, right when it starts or right before it starts. And that already puts Spain at a huge disadvantage because they're thinking in their head, how much more are we like willing to lose in this war, all over just the territory of Cuba? But eventually, the attack with the Cuban revolutionaries is successful on that front, and bam, America wins the Spanish American War of 1898. So then, now, what are the consequences? So, we get Cuba, the Philippines, and Hawaii. All of them officially become territories of the US, and Puerto Rico and Guam all become independent territories who decide their fate through and self-determination, an idea we'll get to soon. Cuba, 1898. So, we freed Cuba. We helped the Cuban revolutionaries establish their democracy. We freed them from a dictatorship. They are no longer underneath anyone's heel. Or so they thought, because the US keeps Cuba around under their heel through the Platt Amendment of 1903, which again is just a big hit toward imperialism and this idea that we're helping the nations that we're in contact with. Because yeah, we went in there to promote democracy, but then we kind of forced Cuba to become a protectorate of the US, and eventually Cuba was released from this, but this did leave a very bad relationship with Cuba for a long time being, which we'll see in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Moving forward, anti-imperialism. So, not every American did root for imperialism. So, let's talk about some of the anti-imperialist efforts. First of which was a whole league formed towards combating imperialism, where they would pop up during a lot of times. They would pop up during the whole Spanish American War and the whole thing with the Platt Amendment. Moving forward, oh crap, the idea of self determination, which I just talked about, and this idea is that these nations, they don't need us to help them develop an identity. We are robbing them of their own national identity, and we are robbing them of the like the chance to really develop for themselves. We are robbing them of that by intervening. And this was an idea applied to Hawaii, and this idea was applied to Puerto Rico and Guam just to kind of get the anti-imperialists off like the imperialist agenda for a little bit, at least in regards to that, and generally just because that was just the conditions and consequences of the Spanish American War. Moving forward, that's self determination. Third reason, issues with the Panamanian Revolution. So Panamanians are launching their own revolution, and again, we intervene in this revolution, except it's not really widely agreed upon that we did it to defend democracy. There is a lot that suggests that America did it simply just to get access to the Panama Canal, which in turn would have given us a massive trade route that would like tremendously boost our economics and just our general net income. So yeah, that's another thing that kind of hints towards the the vileness of imperialism. Final point: it defies foreign policy. Remember George Washington's farewell address, Unit 3. What he says: keep isolated, keep neutral. And this, in a way, is kind of not really keeping isolated and neutral. Like, we are outwardly establishing these relations with other nations across the world. Literally, what Washington was against. And so that also collects many to the anti imperialist cause. And here I just got some cartoons just to visualize, like, how imperialism was viewed. The one on the left here, literally Uncle Sam looks like a creep, something out of a horror film, and like he's like reaching his big creepy hand towards the Philippines and Cuba, while like go staying in the United States. Like I just said, we are massively extending our reach on a global scale, which is going against what George Washington wanted. And this document, this cartoon on the right, it just is a more glamorous view of imperialism where it kind of shows off like this is just another accessory for us. This is just something else to make us look better in a way. Let's move into World War One. So I'm pretty sure we're all very familiar with MAIN, which is often the acronym used to discuss the causes of World War One. Militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Let's get into it. Militarism. Forces worldwide mobilized their armies. So all the superpower nations, all involved in the spark that set off World War One, all mobilized their forces due to the heightened tensions going on in that Eurasia area. And the fear of war is what causes this mobilization. Alliances. Russia had its own alliances with Balkan countries, and France and Britain were already ready for battle because, again, tensions were already rising. It just took a spark. And it was just this idea of if you hurt my guy, I hurt your guy. Or if you hurt my guy, I got his back and you got a problem with me. That's happened with Russia. And imperialism, all the nations wanted to protect the territories and even gain more territories from a conflict. And all these territories that I'm talking about come from the the scramble for Africa, because all the new African territories after Africa kind of got chopped up in that I forgot the name of the conference because it's been a while since I took World, but yeah, all those that's just an example of all the different territories that these nations wanted to protect, and the prospect of war could even bring about new territories, which we see with Germany when they get more territories from war. And finally, nationalism. Tensions rise in the quote unquote Balkan powder keg. I call it that because, like I've been saying, all it took was a spark and everything blew up. Tensions rose in the Balkan powder keg area due to national tensions with Archduke Ferdinand, and obviously, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand is what set off World War One. And then we have our two sides, the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. The Triple Alliance was Italy, Germany, and Austria-Hungary, and the Triple Entente was France, Britain, and Russia, and later on, America. But America wasn't yet part of the war despite it starting here in 1914 because we wanted to cling to our neutrality, our policy of neutrality, our policy of isolationism. We want to abstain from global conflicts because, in the words of our first president Washington, all of it is bad. It's nothing good. So we are going to try and abstain from it, which we've been trying to do for a long, long time. Oh, that's supposed to be animated. But here, this is just to visualize what's happening on the early years of the war. Russia is being severely pushed back. Wait, can I use the draw tool? That's not. Wait, sorry guys. Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is revolutionary. Okay. Yeah, but Russia is being pushed inward, so they gotta fall back. Oh my gosh, where have you been all my life? But yeah, and when they fall back, if you remember from and the 10th grade history class, this is what starts off the Bolshevik Revolution, where Russia withdraws from the war in order to kind of develop themselves and just give themselves time to recover. Because even going into the war, they weren't in really the best condition. They weren't as industrial as the other nations. They really just didn't have much of a fighting chance, and they needed to recover. Maintaining neutrality. So, like I just said, we have these efforts towards maintaining George Washington's wishes for neutrality, and the president, Woodrow Wilson, his whole motto was he kept us out of war. Wilson is doing everything in his power to keep us out of war and maintain neutrality. But neutrality doesn't necessarily mean not like affecting the war in any way, because we are selling arms to both sides, supposedly. Because really, we aren't even selling arms to both sides. We're only selling it to the Entente. So really, neutrality in and of itself is being challenged both externally and in a way internally because America itself is challenging neutrality by selling to only really the Entente. So yeah, that's just efforts towards maintaining neutrality. And then here we have our two conflicts that tip us over the edge, and this is what eventually gets America to join World War One. First of which, the bombing of the Lusitania. Very like this is a well-known thing. So over 100 Americans die caused by a German U-boat submarine. It bombs the boat. Lots of people die, and that is gonna make a lot of American civilians upset. That is like that already in and of itself causes outrage among the like American society, but internally in the American government, supposedly the boat was carrying arms, it was carrying weapons, and weapons cost money. And these were supposed to be shipped to the Entente, but they all got destroyed and they're all lost to sea. So again, history has its economic undertones. We see here there's threat to the economy with Germany potentially destroying hundreds of, if not thousands of dollars of firearms, and who's to say they won't continue to do the same if we continue trade? So that's a threat to our economy that immediately brings up like red exclamation points above our heads. The next thing is the Zimmerman telegram. So Germany sends a telegram to go to Mexico, but it's intercepted by Britain. And in this telegram, it says that basically Germany is saying, let's make an alliance, let's team up, and together we'll attack America and we'll gain back the land you lost. We will get back Texas for you. And just seeing this note was the last straw for Wilson. And here he decides to join World War One because this was the last straw for him. So yeah, moving in, mobilization. How do we mobilize? First things first, Liberty bonds. Purpose is to raise money. It's not necessarily to get people to join the war, it's to raise money for the war. It's playing into a nationalism. It's playing into nationalism. Beat back the Hun with liberty. That's why it's called Liberty bonds. America is built off liberty. There are other ones that go further into this more nationalist sense, but yeah, that's Liberty bonds. The war industry boards were focused more on resource allocation. Let's just look at this poster here. We have one of the war industry needs being water, and that its production must be used wisely. Think of this also in the same vein as dispersing rations towards different soldier groups, and this primarily was just more directly focused on allocating resources and economics for and not economics resources, money for resources. Let's move forward. Continuity, one of my favorite continuities. let's talk and recall the Alien and Sedition Acts. What were the Alien and Sedition Acts? Well, if you remember back in the Unit 3 Part 3 video in 1790. Oh, wait, my handy new tool. In 1798, we have the Alien, which we don't really care about right now, but the Sedition Act is what's more important here, because basically the Sedition Act invoked is that if you spoke negatively and critiqued the government during this time of conflict against France, you could be persecuted. Boom, boom. Now, oh, why to go back? Now, let's compare that to the Espionage and Sedition Act of 1917, which silenced critics of the war and the government. Again, similarly to the Sedition Act of 1798. And the people who often were outspoken about the war were isolationists, anti-imperialists, and pacifists. All of these make a lot of sense in the current foreign policy that the U.S. has. We're already a very thriving imperial nation, so isolationists would be against the war because they want to remain isolated. They want to remain neutral with a lot of different superpowers. And anti-imperialists, again, for in the same reason as isolationists, they don't want all of these outstretched relationships across the globe. And pacifists, obviously, because they don't like violence. That's a big no. Oh, and the continuity here, in just one sentence, the government overextends its power in times of war or in times of need. That's what I would say the continuity is. We see it with the Alien Sedition Acts, which we just talked about. We see it with Lincoln suspending habeas corpus during the Civil War, and we see it once again with the Espionage and Sedition Acts of 1917. Treaty of Versailles, 1918, the treaty that ends the war. Of course, many conditions are set here, but obviously the Triple Entente wins the war. Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary all lose. First thing about the treaty: Germany's government is dismantled. It's fractured, and also its military is dismantled too. So plus milli, and its government isn't necessarily dismantled. So I'll just put little signs there about that. It's not necessarily dismantled, but it's fractured. The military, however, is dismantled. It's completely taken away, pretty much. Germany has no real military power anymore, but its government is fractured. It still remains in the Weimar Republic, which you should have learned about in Worlds and in probably Euro. But yeah, the Weimar Republic persists, but it's very weak, very fractured, and a lot of its powers have been stripped. And the military itself is just non-existent. So, boom. Two other things. Second thing, Germany lost all the territory it gained in World War One. So all the territory it gained by pushing back Russian forces, by anything of those means, all gone, revoked. Third thing, imperial empires are separated through the Treaty of Versailles, promoting self-determination. So all the Triple Alliance all the large territories they owned are all freed. They're all no longer under the heel of the imperial empire they were under. And I also believe this applies to some of the Entente nations as well. So that's another thing that comes out of the Treaty of Versailles. Fourth thing, the League of Nations is formed. The League of Nations was this coalition of the world superpowers, all focused on maintaining global peace and to make sure that another world war never happens again. But it was weak. It was weak because remember, the globe had pretty much been trampled upon. It's gone. A lot of the money has gone to waste. Not necessarily to waste, but it's been spent and used on the war. So a lot of these nations in the League of Nations are very weak. They don't have a lot of power. All they can really do is finger wag. They can't really do a lot besides that. And we're gonna see that around time World War II, when the League of Nations on Hitler's rise can't do anything. They don't have the power to maintain peace. Yet their goal is still to do that. But for now, it's all bark no bite as of right now. Wilson's 14-point plan. So here, Wilson's 14-point plan. So Wilson was actually the one who initially thought of this idea of a League of Nations, and he had his own 14-point plan that was supposed to launch and excel global reconstruction. and he spoke it to the league, he spoke it to all the superpowers, he spoke it to everyone, and they didn't necessarily like it because of the ordeal they had with Germany, where Wilson didn't want to like punish Germany a lot because he knew that it would bite the world in the butt. Punishing Germany to the extent that Germany was punished is what led to the rise of Hitler. But just besides all that stuff, Wilson had his 14-point plan to reconstruct the world, but his ideal vision had America at the pinnacle. It had it at the top as sort of like this the world power, like an unmatched world power that is economically thriving and helping all the other nations and has thriving trade with all of them. And again, economic undertones throughout history. We see economics and trade and profit being the goal here for Wilson. But Wilson's plan is rejected. It's rejected by Congress because they want to stay in their isolationist shell. They want to remain neutral. They want to stay in their shell. So they reject Wilson's plan. Wilson kicks rocks to high hell. And yeah, he doesn't join the League of Nations. The League of Nations still persists, but the U.S. is not a part of the League of Nations, and they return to isolationism and neutrality. They return to that after the World War. And like I've been saying, Treaty of Versailles is what led to the rise of Hitler, punishing Germany and like making an enemy out of Germany, pretty much causing all the spite and hatred from Germany. Like that is what led to the rise of Hitler, because Hitler would rise up and he would team up with Mussolini in Italy, and they would go on to reclaim a lot of the territory, like reclaim territory that was lost from the Treaty of Versailles. They would once again become a superpower. So yeah, but that's the topic for part two, because now part one is done. And yeah, that's that. I will catch you on part two, where we discuss the 1920s, the Great Depression, and the New Deal. And then part three will be World War II, and then maybe some questions if I feel like it. So yeah, see you all later.